Anyway, the last one then that we had last time we were talking about was kind of like giving up some of our things in our homes or deciding what to do with our stuff. And now we have to decide what to do with us. So here we are. Michelle is back with us, and she has done a really fantastic job, I think, and I think you'll all agree. And so we'll look forward to her presentation. And I don't know if I need to tell all of your qualifications or not, because they're written there, and she's very well qualified to give us a very good presentation today, I'm sure. So let's welcome her, and there will be another lunch and learn at some point, not on this topic, but if you ever have any ideas, please feel free to give the committee here ideas on what you might like to hear. And maybe not just for this age group. Maybe you can think of some other things, maybe something you think that your kids ought to hear about how to take care of them.
I could be back for that.
She could come back for that. That would be good, right? Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Michelle.
Thank you.
Around. And this picture is such a beautiful, literally this series is called Reflections. The photographer is Tom Husey, and it's a beautiful image of a woman looking in the mirror, and staring back at her is her reflection of the younger version of herself. So I just am really grateful that you've been on this journey with me these last couple of sessions to be open to the idea of what aging is, could be, is. This is, I think, one of the most complicated things that we do as human beings, and I certainly don't have even a smidge of the answers, but I love having these conversations. So I'm just glad that we're here today to continue the discussion. The t-shirt says, "It's weird being the same age as old people." Which, at whatever age we are, I am 52 presently, and I was having a conversation with some of my peers yesterday, and we're just like, what is happening? This is very strange. So today, my hope, our learning objectives are to just have open hearts and minds, just as we are talking about long-term care services and senior living. Have open hearts and minds. I invite an openness to maybe shifting some perspective. And then I hope to share some helpful information that at least sparks some curiosity within your conversations that you're having with each other, and what you would like what do you want the next chapter in your life to look like and feel like. This was so funny. This picture was taken in Mexico at a resort property. Obviously, our kids are not that little. My son is 6 foot tall. He's taller than me. So, again, it's just about shifting our perspective. So here is my disclaimer and caution. And the reason I share this is that I was the public relations coordinator in a rehab/skilled nursing facility here in town. And a gentleman came in and said, "I need a nursing home for my dad." And I was like, "Well, let's talk. What's going on? Share more about what the situation is." And he said, "Well, a week ago, he lives with us, and a week ago he was up and around and came to the dinner table and was very communicative and conversational. And he's just really become very lethargic, and he can just hardly get out of bed, and I think it's time for him to move into a nursing home." And I said, "I really think he needs to call the doctor. He needs to go to the hospital." This, to me, when we have a really sudden, fast onset of a change of status, if someone is moving about in a certain fashion or way, whatever that looks like, and then there's a really quick decline or change, that we have to get medical professionals involved. And certainly that was his next move. His dad went to the hospital. He had pneumonia and bronchitis and a cracked rib and was not doing it, and his labs were unstable. So, and obviously this is not just the ticket into a nursing home. He was able to be treated medically and regain some independence, and then look to see what's next. So this is my disclaimer. please, if you or someone that you know and care about, or even if you don't like them very much, if you see that they're not doing very well, call their kids or share with another friend or neighbor. Let's triage the current situation. So a very typical scenario is that someone is living at home and then maybe they have a fall. So on your tables, I thought of this exercise as I was driving over. I'm like, oh, this is fun. Let's see if we can pull it off. So I wanted to just briefly go through a typical scenario of our long-term care system. Someone might be at home and have a fall and then require a hospital stay. So if your table says hospital, raise your hand. Okay, so they went to the hospital. Well, at the hospital, the doctors were able to do what needed to be done. And so they are going to be able to go home with some in-home care, some in-home services, and some rehab. So if you're at the table with in-home physical therapy, raise your hand. Perfect. Well, it worked, but to a point, and then something else happened, like they just weren't feeling that great, so they had to go back to the hospital. All right, so now at the hospital, the social worker has said, okay, I think that, you know what, we tried going home, but let's try something else. So let's try doing maybe some inpatient rehab for a little bit. So they've gone to inpatient rehab. Now the social worker there, the moment you are admitted to an inpatient rehab, they are working to get you out. That is their mission at inpatient rehab, because it's only a short time that Medicare will pay for that. So they really want to get you back and healthy and at home. So they may say, okay, we can arrange for some services to go home with inpatient, back home, or maybe it's time to consider assisted living, so AL. So maybe we're going to assisted living. So the families are having discussions, and this is where life gets really sticky, y'all. This is when we don't always agree, we're not on the same page. What needs to happen when? What's the timeline? Where do we go? What's that place? This is what really drags families through the mud, especially when adult children are trying to make those decisions for people. We want to have our own autonomy and make decisions for ourselves. So we decide, you know what? Assisted living is probably the best choice at this point. So we're going to go to assisted living. Where's my assisted living? So now, okay, so we've moved to assisted living, but we had an illness in assisted living. So we're going to have some in-home care services come to assisted living. So now in-home care services are coming raised to assisted living. Okay. So we get the idea. So at some point there is potential, depending on the situation for someone, that they remain in assisted living with hospice services or palliative care service. Where's hospice? So hospice is now maybe come to assisted living, or maybe the situation is such that it's time to look at a skilled nursing facility. Okay, so this is the long-term care ecosystem, and people, we are bouncing around through all of these services for up to the last 12 years of our life. We are managing chronic illnesses. We know that 70% of people age 65 and older are going to require some form of these long-term care services. We're just not dropping dead anymore like we used to. So we have quantity of life. We continue to work on this quality of life that we want. 10 years ago, my stepmom, who's in the orange coat up here, and my dad were ages 70 and 73. And they told us 5 kids, we're moving to a continuing care retirement community. So it's this big resort-style campus that has independent, assisted living, memory care, all the lifestyle things that we want, and then also skilled nursing facility. Well, there's 5 of us kids and we're step-siblings, so I don't know if you all have blended families, but that like doubles down on the complexity. So each of us have our own ability to process that information. Some of my siblings were like, are you kidding me? Absolutely not. No way. Some of our siblings were like, hey man, whatever you want, I'm out. This is not my decision. I have my pom-poms out and I am cheering in the corner. Heck yeah. This is great because you are going to have a whole new community and environment of people that you are active with. And so this is a great example of that. My stepmother and her 3 friends were hiking on the California coastline. They hike once a week. The women in this picture at this time were ages like 79 to 92, I think. So that is, again, part of this ecosystem. So we're just trying to like build a little perspective on what's really truly happening with our long-term care services, and then like what are the options that are available to us as we're trying to navigate it. So why are we so uncomfortable when we talk about senior living? Like even if you just take those 2 words apart, you break them apart, senior we get kind of cranky about too. Like my first company name was Inspired Senior, but nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about being a senior or senior related things. So why are we so uncomfortable? Well, first of all, there is some historical fact. Like in the 1940s, we had in America what were called almshouses. And perhaps this is something you recall from your grandparents. But almshouses were essentially on the outskirts of town, and they were kind of halfway houses, mental health type houses, and it's where sometimes elderly people would go to pass away. Well, they weren't very well regulated, and it was not a great thing. It was not a great environment. So that is our history, and we have this narrative around senior living that is very rooted in that narrative, and it's like a historical hangover. So the almshouses were like that for a certain period of time, and then they started to evolve. So we today are still kind of uncomfortable. One of the reasons is because of where we came from. In 1987, which quite frankly does not feel that long ago to me, 1987, there were additional regulations that came down the pipe about what needed to be happening in nursing homes and the quality of care and life that needed to be provided. So a lot has changed. So again, it's just like opening up to this idea that it's not like it used to be. A lot of things have changed in senior living, but we do have this historical hangover about what it was like. I'm gonna make sure I'm getting all these great points. The other thing is, obviously, we have peers who have made that decision to move into senior living, and so we're starting to get an idea that it could be different than how we thought it might be, but there's also a lot of psychosocial things that are going along with this. So one of the reasons we're so uncomfortable is, the undercurrent is that we are aging and there is loss in our life, and this is hard. So I think that that's just sort of feeds our concern or desire to investigate this concept of senior living and what that can look like for us. And there's also other factors that give people pause, and everybody has their own aging journey and their own reasons why this idea of senior living makes them uncomfortable. So it's just something to be curious about and investigate. Because we can ask ourselves, well, is this true? Or is it just something that I'm wondering or assuming about in my mind? So the reason senior living is so confusing is that senior living is really confusing. Like, independent living seems pretty straightforward. You're moving into an apartment. Sometimes there is a manager on site. Sometimes there are certain activities that are being organized by someone within independent living. Once we move into this assisted living, that next level of care, it is a huge gray zone. And we're going to come back to a little more detail on that. But we have independent living, we have assisted living, We have memory care, which are licensed as assisted livings. And sometimes assisted livings have memory cares within them. And then we have skilled nursing homes, skilled nursing, and then we have respite or rehab. So there's these different pockets within senior living, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so confusing, because we're sort of not sure exactly what's happening behind the doors of any of these places. So assisted living, they're each regulated by different governing bodies. So your assisted living is going to have different regulations and rules than a nursing home, because nursing homes are receiving federal money because of Medicare. And Medicare does not pay for assisted living. And Medicare does not pay for long-term nursing home care. And that is a huge misconception that we're scrambling, I think, to try and clarify and clean up. So Medicare may help with like that short-term rehab. Who's in my rehab? Where's my rehab table? So if you go from the hospital to rehab for a little while, they'll pay as long as you're making progress and improving. But it's for a limited amount of time. But Medicare does not pay for assisted living. So within assisted living, most of these buildings have different levels of care. So you have that base rate, and then just sort of depending on what services are needed, you add them on. Kind of like my daughter in the college campus, and like we're going to choose this food plan and this set of courses. Like, so they're going to keep offering different services depending on what's needed. So there are people that can help you navigate the confusion of this. There are companies like Assisted Living Locators or Claire Senior Advisors. If you look on Google for names like Senior Advisor or, again, Assisted Living Locator, these are free services to you that can help you understand what options are actually available to you that would be best suited for what you want and the kind of quality of life and lifestyle that you want. So the reason it's so confusing is it's really confusing. There's over 65 properties in Omaha alone, over 65. And then we have these really expansive properties like my dad and stepmom live in California that have these different levels of care on campus. So you can stay in your apartment and then continue to receive additional services like PT coming into the home or maybe palliative care services in your apartment. So does it feel like it's a little clearer, if that's possible, that there's these different levels of care? We start at independent living, and then it typically goes to assisted living, and within that there's a lot that can be offered there. And then sometimes we might need a nursing home depending on what's going on. So what's happening behind those doors? What's happening in those buildings? So the companies have worked really hard to do their research and to have a better understanding of what it is that we want, what it is we're looking for, what kind of quality of life do we want. I have been to campuses, and I say campuses because some of them are multiple buildings in one area. They have golf simulators, beauty salons, they have pickleball courts. There's one in town that has a shooting range. There are bars. There are multiple restaurants. There are education series. There are entertainers. There's a company in town who goes on an explorer trip every year. They've gone overseas. They're going to Chicago. So there's a lot of things being offered within that building's ecosystem. So it's really about dialing into what your own hobbies and interests are and seeing, okay, well, who is offering what? But hopefully we're just expanding the idea that we're not thinking of just that almshouse the way it was in the 40s, the 1940s. It really is different, and they're working really hard to make sure that we have an active, vibrant quality of life. Well, how am I supposed to pay for this, Michelle? So, we've established Medicare will not pay for this. And in this country, there is a very messy middle that we are still trying to figure out, and it's a big problem to solve. So we know if someone is receiving Medicaid, if their net worth, their assets total $4,000 or less, they qualify for Medicaid. They're going to do a 5-year look back to see where the money has been flowing for the last 5 years. So if we wake up and decide to give a child $50,000, if we've sold a house, if cars have been sold, they're going to look at all of that, and any indicator that money has flowed in a direction that the government doesn't feel like it should have over the last 5 years, if that could have been money used to take care of yourself, that can disqualify you from qualifying for Medicaid. So that is one aspect of how we pay for this, is we're on Medicaid. Now, a lot of these assisted livings that I talked about with the hair salons and the bowling alleys and the golf simulator, they may not have Medicaid apartments. Some of them might, but most often those are not. So then we have the other end of the spectrum, which is private pay. That's just us through either retirement accounts, pensions, IRAs, railroad, veterans benefits. That's the other end of the spectrum. That's going to help us pay for these senior living communities. And then we have this kind of middle ground where it's like I have some, but not that much, or I have some benefits, but it won't fully cover everything. And that's where it's important to get with your own personal advisors and work the formula with them on like, how is it going to work for me to pay for this? And one of the questions I've asked clients is, how long do you think you're going to live? I mean, none of us know. Like, we are all hoping for today, at least the rest of today. But how long do you think you're going to live? If I was at a presentation, I did a presentation last week, and one of the gentlemen was 103. So he's like, I don't think it's another 10 years, but I don't know. I mean, he looks pretty good. So there are some, and I think, if you're wondering how long you're going to live for, apply for insurance. Because the actuaries are going to give us some information on that. But so this messy middle of how am I going to pay for it, it's something that truly needs to be spreadsheeted and formulaed to try and get a better idea of how to pay for it. The other thing is, again, shifting perspective and mindset, because we have been in training for this moment our whole lives. Like, I started saving my money right out of college. So we think, well, we have to save it for a rainy day. Well, we have to save it for retirement. Well, we have to save it for fill in the blank. And then at what point is our mindset, is it okay to start shifting to, maybe it's raining. Maybe, okay, I've been in retirement for 15 years, so what is my goal with that, with those assets? And these are, again, are questions I can't answer for you, but it's just around being curious about what is the hope. Now, my father-in-law had the whole, like, movie fantasy. He and my mother-in-law would be gone, and we'd be sitting with the attorney, and the attorney would be like, you are rich now because Roger saved. He worked so hard, and he did. And, we just got to this point where there had to be a lot more transparency because he and my mother-in-law needed our care. So there had to be more transparency about the numbers. And he had worked and saved his whole life and was able to provide him and his wife wonderful care in their last years because he had done that. So it's a little bit about, again, shifting perspective on you've been saving, and at what point is it time to start reinvesting that money back in ourselves and our care? So these are my lovely in-laws, and this goes back to the when is it time? When is it time to make this move? And the baseline that I always share is we're thinking about the health, the safety, and the well-being for you, for family caregivers, for anybody that's involved. Health, safety, and well-being. And we got to the point with my mother-in-law, she had been diagnosed with dementia in 2016, and we just got to this point where safety started to get a little concerning. Like, was it safe to have car keys around? Was it safe to have the oven around? Was it safe that at night maybe she wouldn't leave in the night? And then for my father-in-law, he had a cancer diagnosis. And so his mobility was becoming limited. And so we were thinking about his safety in the home. And I'll tell you, the number one thing everyone wants all of us to remove are those throw rugs. The fire department is praying you'll get them out of your house. PT and OT is going to ask you to remove them. Those cute decorative rugs are massive tripping hazards. So that's a safety issue. So health, safety, and well-being. And you know, our bodies are not designed to just keep going forever. They're just not yet. They're working on it with this AI thing. But in the meantime, we are designed, you know, to like plant life, like nature. We are also cyclical. So just thinking about our well-being and what's going to work for us in the life that we want. When Sherry was diagnosed, and I don't think this is an exaggeration, their world just shrank. It just shrank. They stopped really going out. They stopped participating in things. They literally pulled the curtains in the living room and turned on the TV. And they just sat for about 3 years until it was to the point that it was just clear that it was time for a change. And so that's another invitation about when is it time to consider a shift, either with bringing people in home or maybe a move. It's thinking like, is this sustainable? Like, I know I can do this today. Can I do this another week? Can the way things are continue for another month? What about 3 years? And to start working the spreadsheet on that. When is it time? And I've shared this slide at least one other time, just this caregiving timeline. And we've talked around through the different tables how we bounce through the long-term care services system. The blue dots represent buffering. We're buffering. The blue dots represent the person that we're caring for, and then the red dots represent the family caregiver. So it's important to have a heightened awareness around the support systems that we have in place and how are the people doing that are helping us. Because even when I was a caregiver for both of my grandmothers, age 27 to 37, and I was having my babies, we had 3 children, it was still hard for me. It still was taking a toll on my health. There was a lot of wine involved. Which was my own doing. My grandmas weren't pouring. There was a lot of wine involved. But there is a caregiving timeline. And so it's hard for us to self-assess, like how am I actually doing and how are the people around me doing? So just to have a heightened awareness around that. And we know as family care partners, it's so important to put our oxygen mask on first, to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. And that is very varied, and it can be really triggering. My mother, who is 79, is caring for her husband who has end-stage cancer. And she gets so annoyed when people are telling her, are you practicing self-care? She's like, So, but it is important, and she does walk daily and eat healthy and have time with friends and works out with her trainer. So it's so individualized of what that means to us. But this is all tying around like, when is it time to consider a move? So I had no idea at this tender age of 13 that in just 15 short years I would be the caregiver to these two wonderful women. And I had the privilege of being with them on this journey. And a few things have come up for me just as I have helped them navigate their end of life, and then helped and been by my in-laws as they navigated their end of life. And one of the things that I think is really important is the language that we're using. And we talked about this with mindfulness and aging. What's the language that we're using around senior living? Because I can assure you, 90% of the time what I'm hearing is those places. I promised I would never move them into one of those places. And I feel like the places that we're referring to are those 1940s almshouses. And absolutely, I agree. I would never, ever choose that for someone. And the system is trying to catch up, and it really has accelerated and caught up. So just being mindful around our language and how we are referring to senior living. And partially it's because we know that 70% of people age 65 and older are going to need a long-term care service. So anything that has been represented in the room at the tables, I think that number is low. In my estimation, 100% of us are at some point going to need, I've already been to physical therapy once, so I think that there's a solid chance that all of us at some point are going to need or want some of these services that are available to us. So just being mindful of our language. My father-in-law called it the home. The home.
Yeah.
The home gives me, this man was 74 years old. The home gives me only a little piece of pie.
Oh.
Why don't you ask for a second piece? The home. So, and it's because, again, there are regulations, there are dietary, like we're trying to fit 10,000 shapes into one size fits all situation, but we're really trying to create patient, people-centered care. So the home is a very triggering, so it triggered me every time he said that because I was working in senior living at the time. But that was his experience that really resonated with him. He had his car there. He could leave anytime he wanted to go to Walmart. So that's part of one of the other things just to take into consideration. The idea is not that we're moving so our independence can be stripped away. The idea is that we are considering a next step in what our health and care needs are so that we can remain as independent as possible for as long as possible. So language is really important. There's this guilt resentment coin that often gets flipped within families as well, especially when we're thinking about senior living and senior care. It's, again, I think part of that historical hangover of the narrative, but it's not a failure to make a decision for yourself or if needed for someone else, that the care that is being provided in the home is not enough. Like, we need more help. That is not a failure. That is something to be celebrated, that we were able to provide this great care in the home up until a certain point of time. And when the scale tips with health and safety and well-being, it's fair to start thinking of what else needs to be done. What are my other options? So thinking those things through. It's really important, again, that families are so often struggling with the timeline of when things should occur and then what those next steps are. So as often as possible, if we're making those decisions for ourselves, that really helps set the whole family up for success. And then one of the things that I often share is this is uncomfortable. And we're kind of trained our whole lives to be uncomfortable. Like getting out of the shower on a cold winter day is uncomfortable. So there is going to be some discomfort with the thought of change. And discomfort is often the currency for success. So having an uncomfortable conversation now can really set us up for success for the years to come. So just thinking through, what discomfort am I willing to experience now in order to be more comfortable in my future? So what happens once someone makes that decision, that choice, or needs to move to senior care? In my experience, one of the things I think people aren't aware of is you can give 30 days notice and move out. I did a podcast episode on this, 30 days notice. So when you're moving into a senior living community, it's a month-to-month lease. It's not a year-long commitment like a different style of apartment. So in my experience, in the 7 years I have worked in senior living, no one has ever moved out. Once they have made that decision to move into a space where there is more activity, there is more stability in meal prep, in medication management, whatever those things are, people start thriving. And what's really interesting is as family care partners, we get to go back to being the daughter or granddaughter. And so that changes our relationship again. And it's so fascinating to me when I have a daughter call and say, well, they're not happy. Well, when they move in 2 weeks ago. Okay. 2 weeks. If you or I move from Papillion to Millard, that's going to take us some time to adjust. Even if we just moved into another house, like it's a different bubble. It's a different ecosystem. If we move from Elkhorn to Bellevue, that's a big move. So it takes time for us to adjust to these life changes and situations. So some of this is around expectation management. And that's a really key point. What are my expectations of what my life is going to be like? Am I visualizing it in a more positive way? And expectation management with our children of, how long do you think it should take me? I'm a woman and this is hard and I have emotions and it's okay. It's okay to feel sad for a period of time when we're going through life transitions. When we moved to Omaha from Kansas City, we lived there 16 years. Cared for my grandmas, had all our kids, but we knew it was time to move to Omaha. It took me time to adjust and fall in love with Papillion and Omaha. And I got there. It happened. So the majority of my experience is it is such a positive experience for everyone involved, and it's just a matter of expectation management on how long that should happen, how fast that should happen. So one of the things that I'm constantly sharing is this concept of the 3 C's, the 3 pillars of caregiving, which are curiosity, communication, and compassion. And I think those are really important pillars for the aging journey as well. Having curiosity about what's working and what's not working. Communicating what we need for our lives, and then having compassion for ourselves and the people that we're caring for. This is a wild ride, this human experience. It is an absolute wild ride. And I love that we're all still here. Like God woke us up today and said, get on over there. So how can we weave through that curiosity and openness and then figuring out and communicating what our needs are and then having compassion? So I'm hoping that we've illuminated senior living a little bit today. I try not to make it just a complete fire hose of information. It is very confusing. There are people to help you navigate it. the main thing again is just having an openness and curiosity and thinking through what it is that you do want and need. And 90% of people want to stay home. We want to stay in our homes. And oftentimes we're not pulling through those services that can really help us do that. It's really important to get those interventions in sooner rather than later. And then if it comes to the point where that's not an option, what's next? What do we want? What do we want it to look like and feel like and taste like and smell like and be like? Because we do have a say and get to create that for ourselves. So thank you so much for listening, and I would love to field questions and hear your feedback because I always learn so much when I'm with you. Yes?
Tell me about how much assisted living might be.
How much might assisted living cost? It really depends on the building, and it can be $3,000, $2,000, $3,000, upwards to $8,000 a month, depending on the building. And again, if you are receiving Medicaid services, that is a totally different ballgame. And I will say, and I'm not a Medicaid or Medicare expert, that would be a different presenter for you, but the sooner you think that might be the direction that you're going, the sooner you start flushing that out and exploring it, the better. Because there are so many amazing in-home services available through Medicaid that are just not being utilized. Yes?
Is there any place one can find a list of all of the places in Omaha and addresses that do this kind of thing?
That's a great question. Is there a one-stop shop list for all of the addresses and all the places in Omaha? There is a book called the Elder Care Handbook. It is a free resource. It's distributed all over the city, and I'll tell you what, I will get with my contact and just have some dropped off here, if that works for you. Yeah. And in there will be ads of people who paid to advertise. It's also a comprehensive list. And if you go online and type in assisted living Omaha, a billion things are gonna bubble to the surface. I'm a list in a book and a paper person too, so. Great question. Yes?
I've experienced people that have had different things happen. And between somebody at 53 that had a stroke or whatever. And there's the waiting list issue for all different kinds of things. And then, to me, what sounds frightening is they're in a rehab, and like you said, they only have so long, and then they want you to live, but they want you to leave. And if you don't have a place, I can't even imagine what would happen. I guess you have to make some kind of choices, but then sometimes the choices just aren't there.
Yeah, so she's highlighting kind of how broken the system is, which is someone has something happen, they go to rehab, they've made progress to a point, and now they're saying, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And so there's a waiting list situation, or just having an idea of like what services would be available and where those are being provided. So that's a really great question and point. The whole system feels fragile, and often it does work. Like the timing tends to work. It's like buying and selling a house, and then the person that's your buyer, it's like their house is being sold contingent on that next buyer, and you're just like, how is this ever going to line up? And then somehow it works. This is where having your best case scenarios outlined is such a good idea. My mom and I did a podcast episode where she shared, because she lives in Canada with her husband that she cares for. So we outlined, if I have a short-term disability and he is fine, this is what I want. if I have a longer term disability and he is not fine, this is what I want. So just going through the scenarios and thinking through, and then having places, this is like a great research time because everybody's doing really good. We're all here together right now. So if you have some places in mind, start by just calling and saying, I'm interested in having more information, or can I get on your waiting list? And then having that next option and then that next option available. I'm answering your question without answering your question. It's kind of,
I just kind of wondered, it's like this one, I don't know, 55-year-old had a stroke, and then she also had cancer treatments, so she was in the hospital for a while and then went to rehab. Well, she ended up finding an apartment in Bellevue that works for somebody in a wheelchair, and then she even has to have a lift to get herself in bed. And now she's learning how to drive a wheelchair van that she finally purchased. But I mean, this has been 2 years. I guess I just wonder, what do they do if you absolutely have no place to go? I know they have social workers, and hers was limited in helping her. And so she had to do a lot, and thank goodness she cognitively could. But geez, it's frightening to me to see.
and I think it's a growing industry, this next layer of senior advocates who can help people
Okay.
figure out what resources in town are available. I know there is an organization in Omaha, and she's a nurse, and she helps you, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but she can look at, like, through your medical chart and pick out different things and offer different suggestions and then help you navigate the medical system. A friend of mine was just messaged me this morning, her daughter's having a situation, she knows the medical system. Like, she is part of the medical system, and she said, this is outrageous. Like, the complexity and the confusion, and we'll go over there, we'll try this, we'll do that. So there's this bubbling group of individuals who are rising to try and help people piece those resources together.
How do the senior advocates make their money?
Sometimes they're private pay, and sometimes they may bill through some insurances. The people like assisted living locators I mentioned, they get paid by the building. They have contracts with the building. So if you decide to work with someone, they can help you figure everything out, come alongside your family, help be part of the solutions, with the conversations. And then when you move into a place, that's when they get paid. Yeah. Yeah.
Where in Canada?
She lives in Ottawa,
Okay.
Ottawa, Canada.
I'm from there. I mean, I
Oh,
was born there.
yeah, it's beautiful. It reminds me honestly of Kansas City and Omaha combined.
Oh.
Like, every place is like Omaha, so we just may as well never leave. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question. If you get put on a waiting list and at that point you're not really ready, do you stay, do you stay at that level or do you go all the way to the bottom? Or does it vary
You
with-
stay, at most of the places that I'm familiar with, you would stay at that level. So you would say, nope, I'm not ready, and they would just go down that list.
Okay.
I don't know how many times they'll do that. Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, and then they're like, okay, we gotta figure out what's next. Yeah.
Some places I've researched, you can be on that spot indefinitely, and some after you refuse 2 or 3 times, then you're out.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the facility.
Depends on the, and so even the word facility feels kind of,
Oh, sorry.
no, that's okay. I just, as you said it, I was like, right? Like, we need new
What would be
language.
the politically correct term to use?
Yeah, so what, I don't know. Like, residence feels, what else feels more friendly? Community, anything else feels more friendly? Not the home. Yeah. But it's confusing because skilled nursing facilities are called SNFs, so, but I did always prefer to our places, a community, our building. Yeah. I think part of it is just, again, to illuminate, it's the demystifying. Like, things that we don't understand and don't know feel scary. My daughter was a camp counselor in New Hampshire all summer at a summer camp. And, I mean, we did our best to prepare her based on the information that we had, but a lot of times you just don't know until you're experiencing something, what it's going to be like. So my wish is just to foster curiosity and be willing to do some research. If anybody is on Instagram or Facebook, I've gone behind the scenes. I don't know if I can be clever enough. And I've done some little short video clips, like where I'm just taking a video of just walking through the door. This is the living room. They have restaurants. Like, here's one of the restaurants. You know, here's the bar. So I'm trying to do some of those to help it not feel so scary. These are really good questions. I could talk about this all day. Probably don't want to. Any other questions? Well, I have loved coming and having time with you. I really have so much. I've looked forward to each of these sessions. Send your kids to me and I'll tell them to back off. I'm going to tell them we're working on it. We're working on it. Send them to the podcast, Inspired Caring. But it's really about you living your best life every day, which is God's plan for each of us anyway. So whatever it takes to make that happen, I'm on your team. Yeah. Thank you all so much.